So what are you? Man or Superman?
I haven't figured it out yet.
Hello everyone, and welcome to a special Unsourced Wall presentation, a look back and retrospective of Smallville, the superhero show that basically kickstarted the modern superhero TV wave, and a show that I've always had a special soft spot for. So when it was confirmed that last year's Crisis on Infinite Earths event was going to be linking to Smallville, I took that as an opportunity to go back and rewatch the series with fresher eyes and a new perspective. And now, with the help of some very uncarefully taken notes, here's a look back at Smallville season by season. Starting off, of course, with season 1, which premiered on the WB back in 2001. And before we get on into it, we're going to have to take a step back and lay some groundwork first, because this isn't a show called Superboy. And not because of the real life legal reasons, but because if season 1 and the first couple of seasons are about anything, it's about the town and the characters and their own individual arcs. So let's get on with it. First off, of course, we have Tom Welling as Clark Kent, who, for what he gets, does a pretty good job. The CW/WB has always been a teen soap network, so the show places heavy emphasis on him being an everyday average kid.
Tastes better on a bottle.
Where'd you learn your manners?
On a farm?
Someone more concerned with playing sports, doing things to become popular, and throwing wild teenage parties and hoping your parents don't find out. This means that he can be a bit of a grimy creep at times and weirdly obsessive because the CW has never really understood romance. That said, Welling is able to capture something of a youngster man having a doe-eyed sweetness and, while stubborn, is still willing to learn and grow. What really helps us along are the characters of Ma and Pa Kent, who are some of the best versions of the Kents as parents ever in this show. Just a couple who are trying to do their best, and it really leads to some heartwarming and engaging moments between all of them as a family.
Clark, I don't know what your future holds.
I think this woman has the answers.
The only person who controls your destiny is you.
They're still very principled and idealistic, but the show doesn't go too far and make them one-note or dimensionless. Even they themselves call each other out.
No, you were the obedient son who always obeyed his father and didn't run away one summer and try out for the Metropolis Sharks.
Since when did you go and join the other side?
Jonathan, Clark hasn't been able to do anything normal his whole life. No play groups, no Little League, all because we were afraid he might hurt somebody. He's a teenager now. Let's give him a shot.
His gifts come with responsibilities.
This isn't about his gifts. It's about his judgment. You're telling Clark that you don't believe in him.
Of course I believe in him. What if he makes a mistake and somebody suspects the truth? I do not want anyone coming on this farm and taking our son away from us.
Well, if we don't start trusting him, nobody's going to have to take him away. He's going to leave all by himself.
Altogether, it's this gentle, natural mentoring, and even aspects that would be exaggerated later on, like Pa's hatred of the Lufers,
Drive slower.
are more subdued this season, and more or less just used to highlight a virtue that Clark needs to understand.
It's a gift from Lex Luthor.
I know how much you want it, son. But you can't keep it.
Why not? I saved the guy's life.
So you think you deserve a prize?
That's not what I meant. Look, how about you drive the new one and I'll drive the old one? Everybody wins.
This is not about winning, Clark.
Which is really necessary at curtailing the more unlikable and creepy habits that Clark sometimes gets into.
What are the prices you pay for your abilities?
That's why I volunteered.
I'm sure it had nothing to do with the fact that Lana is running it.
Well, Whitney dropped out.
So you thought you'd move in?
But everything needs some contrast, and Smallville hit the jackpot when it cast John Glover and Michael Rosenbaum as Lionel and Lex Luthor in the show. Glover's lines are some of the first that we hear in the show by anyone, and not only do they create a nice distinction between the Luthers and the rest of the cast and the tone of the show, but they're also consistently entertaining.
Luthers are not afraid. We don't have that luxury. You're never gonna get anywhere with your eyes closed.
Congratulations, Lex. You made the business page for once. I told Dominic I was doing this 2 days ago.
Yes, and my drone dutifully reported it to me. Did you know the Caesars would send their sons to the furthermost corners of the empire so they could get an appreciation of how the world works?
Whatever helps you sleep at night, Dad.
Together, the two families are the greatest strength of the show's first few seasons. The idealistic, comforting Kents and the cynical, bitter Lufers. While the Kents might come at odds and argue, they'll talk things out and reach a solution and compromise together.
Look, Clark, I'm your father. I'm supposed to have all the answers. That kills me that I don't, but you gotta have faith that we'll figure this thing out together.
The Lufers won't do that.
I want those workers gone by noon tomorrow. Meeting adjourned.
It keeps the show tonally on its feet without becoming too stale. Next up on our roster are Chloe Sullivan and Pete Ross, who are two of the most accidentally important characters to the trajectory of the show. Nothing that happened in Smallville could have happened were it not for what it did with these two characters. Chloe is pretty much the end result of splitting the character Lana Lang into two separate characters, taking the friend slash confidant slash ship tease half and merging out the intrepid journalistic aspects of Lois Lane. And having the ripple effect of that being that the character who's most iconic leaves Superman's past can now exist outside of it, which led to a lot of ridiculous fan theories. Chloe fits really well into that role, however, although she can feel like an afterthought at times, and even the show thinks so.
Just because you can't get past your Lana crush, don't knock the rest of us for trying to make a love connection.
I thought we were focusing on me here.
And then you have Pete Ross, who is basically the walking escape closetist, similar to comics Pete Ross, who was used to tie up the loose romantic threads between Lana and Clark. And you see the show eventually try to attempt this between Pete and Chloe, but it never really goes anywhere. All this also had the side effect of taking away all the fun dynamics between Lana and Clark, since all those aspects have been carved out of her and put someplace else, meaning that she is basically more of a girl next door slash crush cliche. That said, it actually works pretty well, because for as not dynamic or interesting as she can be, Lana is basically just the show's nicest person. I know that she gets a lot of criticism as a character for being overly saccharine or idolized by the writing, but at least in the first season, she's mainly just an average kid who has to go through some of the more grounded character beats.
What is this, some sort of like a cheerleading charity, like be a waitress for a night sort of thing?
Yes, it is, except for the cheerleading and charity parts. And tips are always appreciated.
Such as trying to connect with her dead parents by living up to the expectations that she thinks they would have of her, or learning more about them in general, and Kruick handles all that pretty well. And on my rewatch, I found the criticism of her character to be a little bit unfounded because, if anything, it's Clark and his creepiness that really drags the show down whenever he's around her, all by himself. So in a way, it's kind of genius that this show gives her a kryptonite necklace.
4, 5.
I mean, it's a brilliant gag. Rounding out the main cast is Lex Luthor by himself because John Glover is mostly a guest spot this season.
Thanks, Dad.
While usually supplanted by Glover in terms of pure malicious glee, Lex is still able to have some of that cunning that the character is well known for, but also imbuing a type of naivety and idealism that is almost certainly ripping on a Citizen Kane-style character arc.
A lot of farms in town are having money trouble.
Most people aren't looking for more loans.
I'm offering my role as an investor. Help people modernize and expand. This town once grew 20% of the corn in the state. Smallville was a heavy hitter. It just lost the drive to stay competitive.
Or its connections.
If this town ever had connections, they wouldn't have named it Smallville.
Although, his attempts to connect to Clark and his friends can be odd and kind of skeevy at times, especially in how he sees himself as Clark's wingman, even though the other characters are at most 15 this season.
You can't knock your taste in women. Kind of makes you wonder if you're with the right guy.
For someone who wants people to keep an open mind, you're pretty quick to judge.
What can I say? I just think you're with the wrong guy.
But it helps to underline and emphasize his general alienation and loneliness. He overdoes things because he hasn't had any friends or actual affection, and using his wealth is the only way he knows how to relate to people.
What is it about Kents and gifts?
And his attitude is something we had to see him confront because it came with a price in his past, which does come back to haunt him.
Trust me. When I make things disappear, they stay buried.
But possibly the most obvious he gets about this is when he tries to connect to a child with the only thing that he really knows, being a lonely kid who grew up loving comics.
Warrior Angel. I'm a fan myself. You know I have one of the
original first edition panels framed in your house.
How'd you know that?
You're rich?
And last but not least, we have Whitney Fordman, who I probably wouldn't talk about that much because he's only in this one season, and he plays a pretty cliche role in it as the bully jock and Lana's insensitive boyfriend. But even he gets some scenes that flesh him out and give him more dimension than I expected.
I don't want to be a... Remember him. Smallville's got enough of those guys.
Such as his genuine care for Lana and the pressure from his crumbling home life and his dying father that's really weighing on him.
You haven't told Lana yet, have you?
I fear she's been through enough pain in her life with her parents. I didn't want her to have to go through it with me.
So it's a shame that his actor Eric Johnson didn't stick around to flesh him out further, although he did end up giving us the most iconic image of the show. Even Marvel parodied it. And with all that out of the way, we can finally move on to the main arc of Season 1. And that's the fact that it doesn't really have one. It's a very standard Monster of the Week, or Freak of the Week as the show would call it, season.
I call it the Wall of Weird. It's every strange, bizarre, and unexplained event that's happened in Smallville since the meteor shower. That's when it all began. The town went schizo.
And for that kind of season, this first one knocks it out of the park. We have age-defying serial-killing senior citizens, people with pyrokinesis, bank-robbing, shape-shifting teen runaways, invisible stalkers, and even a diet-obsessed, fat-eating vampire played by Amy Adams of all people. And this isn't even the last time the show would tackle vampires. And who forgets Spider-Boy, the villain purposely created to ride on the then-recent first Raimi Spider-Man movie, who ends up acting more like Harry Osborn?
Do you know the average butterfly only lives for 8 hours?
You know, spiders can change their color to blend into their environment.
Although I guess that makes Whitney more like comics Flash Thompson, blonde and all.
Do me a favor and quit tailing my girlfriend.
Joking aside, the plots this season at least tried to confront issues about bullying, peer pressure, and general creeps, things that high schoolers might have to contend with. And in the words of Robert L. Washington III, from the back pages of the original first issue of Static, surviving adolescence takes at least as much heroism as flying. Although I must say, Pete, Chloe, and Clark do end up pulling off a pretty good Scooby Gang impersonation. But overall, this does leave the show more room to tie everything together in terms of the character dynamics and relationships. Like I mentioned before with Flex, there's a big spotlight on his growing friendship with Clark, and an emphasis on his past personal life and how he used to treat people.
You did this on purpose!
You did it to yourself.
He starts seeing Smallville as a new beginning of sorts, away from his father's influence, and from his previous jet-setting lifestyle.
Clark, do you believe a man can fly? I flew over Smallville, and for the first time, I didn't see a dead end.
And it's not even subtle about this, as it's that kind of lifestyle that leads to the crash that almost kills him. And it's Clark who is the epitome of the small town that saves him and gives him a new chance at life. And just how hollow his previous life was is hammered home by memorable episodes like this one with Tony Todd, where his father's cruel indifference and actions end up ruining a man's life and giving him kryptonite poisoning, and ends up getting Lex taken hostage and almost killed. Not only is this the most impactful Freak of the Week episode of the season, or maybe the entire series, because of how Tony Todd conveys the actual human cost of being the monster of the week, but also because it's incredible character building all around, since by the end, Lex starts to realize that everything that he used to mock is something that he now desperately needs. All of this culminates in finale where he uses this newfound respect for others and his community in order to lead a takeover of the Smallville branch of Luthor Corp.
You're supposed to mortgage our houses?
It's a risk, I know. But in exchange, the investors will become minority owners.
Doesn't your father control the board? What makes you think he's gonna go along with a buyout?
I know a couple of members I can convince, and I don't need a unanimous decision. I'm offering you the chance to take control of your own destiny. Stand with me, and we will win.
Here's a Luthor Corp employee. Here at Luthor Corp, we always put family first.
On smaller scales, there's Chloe having to contend with her own unspoken anxieties about her feelings for Clark, and it forms the main undercurrent in 2 episodes this season, where she gets a villainous love interest, a really cool player who ends up actually killing people with an ice touch, and a wannabe nice guy who is actually just a psychokinetic serial killer. And we'll see more of that before we're done. And again, we get more development on Whitney and his fears about becoming a former high school bum when he loses his scholarship, and all those fears and anxieties cause him to lash out because he has to confront them directly.
You told Lonnie yet? I am going to spend the rest of my life in this store, develop a bad heart at 50 like my dad, and become just another remember him. I'm never getting out of Smallville.
And it leads to him being tempted to join other former jocks who have started a superpowered crime spree. And it's oddly self-destructive and depressing to see that happen. Lana gets on this too with a tiny but insanely impactful thread about how conflicted her relationship with Whitney is getting, and how she feels unsure about approaching him about this because of his ongoing issues.
I just need some space.
That's what you want, fine. But if you can't even confide in me, I don't even know why we're going out in the first place.
Kruick and Johnson are able to play it off handily, showing that there are other characters with more relatable, more grounded subplots that are distanced and away from the average Monster of the Week episode, and are more kind of engaging as a result. As much as the show is focused on the ongoing Lana-Clark endgame ship teasing, it's all about these two characters who still love each other and are trying to show each other that they still do care. And I'm always going to find that more exciting and more interesting than endgame pairing, because that's usually just fluff. Oh, and I should mention the shapeshifters, except with Lana, that's going to become important in a season or 2. Pete doesn't get to do anything, unless you count his day with the diet vampire. That's about it. Which only really leaves us with Clark himself. If there's no big monster to fight or world-ending arc to contend with, then what's the first season supposed to be about for him? And it's about growing up. People might have disliked the no flights, no tights rule that was at the core of the series, but what it really helped with was that stripping him of his powers was like putting the training wheels on.
As soon as you start breaking the law of gravity, we're definitely in uncharted territory.
All he had was speed, strength, and eventually X-ray vision. And even then, him having to learn how to use those took some time.
I mean, the first time I thought I was hallucinating, and then it happened again.
Clark, I'm sure there's some way to control this.
You guys, I can see through things. How do you control that?
So outside of having to kill / not really kill the Freak of the Week, his arc this season is about learning the limits and boundaries of his powers. And the show does a really good job balancing all that out, because these lessons come at him emotionally, like when Clark befriends a young kid who's being abused by his foster parents, or mentally, like when Clark learns the true extent of his powers and that he might live forever.
What if it is my destiny? To outlive everyone that I love. I don't want to be alone.
And even surprisingly socially, like in this student government episode where Clark runs for class president, but is rightfully called out for not really taking it seriously.
I just want to know what you stand for.
I stand for truth, justice, and other stuff.
Okay, well, you want to be a little more specific? Like, tell me where you stand on the issues?
What issues you want to talk about?
Well, for starters, there's the plan to cut the arts budget. There's the appalling nutritional value of the cafeteria meals, the whole dress code debate. Oh, yeah, and not to mention the whole student privacy issues with the locker searches.
Whoa, slow down. I just decided to run last night.
Okay, well, I think the man of tomorrow needs to get a platform for today.
And the Freak of the Week that episode is obsessed with the election, which I guess kind of makes it a ripoff of that one Static Shock episode.
You will all vote for me as president of the freshman class.
Pete nominated me.
So you're going to take your name off the ballot?
Yeah.
Well, good, because this election is way too important to turn into a joke.
This season even pulls the power swap card really early and has Clark learn more about the responsibilities that come with having these powers. And he only has 2.
Get out of my way!
So yeah, it might be low on stakes, but even the concept of Freak of the Week allows these episodes to have some excitement because all the monsters have kryptonite radiation out the wazoo. The Tony Todd episode probably makes the most use of this conceit because Clark has to save the day basically unpowered.
Clark, how did you pull us up?
I don't know. Adrenaline, I guess.
And to keep things consistent, even the finale is relatively low-key, but still substantial. The entire series had cliffhanger endings, and this one is basically the least impressive. With an astonishingly dodgy speed effect, Clark runs into a CGI tornado, and that's basically it. But the underwhelming nature of that is fine because it's not the real climax finale. What were the small character ties like Lex and Lionel finally confronting each other, or Whitney joining the army, and him and Lana realizing they still do love each other right before they're separated forever. Or even Pa Kent running out into the tornado to try and protect Clark's secret. Because that's a subplot I forgot to mention. This is a teen soap, and like a soap opera, everyone had something going on. I didn't even mention Lex's dealings with alien tech and not Emil Hamilton. And in the end, that's what makes this first season really special, I think.
How is it?
It's simple, but it's also surprisingly rich and interesting to watch. Is it perfect? No. It can be the bad kind of corny, silly, and lame. But it's more confident as a first season than most first seasons can even dream of. And it does a lot more too. And that's what makes it one of my favorite seasons of the show, if not just my outright favorite. And before you accuse me of forgetting to mention some things, here are a few things that I want to talk about before I wrap this up. First, let's talk about the music. Now, if you didn't know, back in the day, WB pretty much had this mandate between their media departments to synergize, like their music department and the CW. And that's why in the CW shows, you got a lot of cross-sells. And by the album of this episode, promotional ads at the end of episodes, all sorts of crazy stuff. And Smallville was basically the vanguard for this, and might have been the most successful at it. So you pretty much hear this synergy in every other episode. Here's a taste.
Happy birthday.
And trust me, it just gets better in the next 3 seasons. Next up, we have the rise and fall and rise of the Talon. Now, is it silly and ridiculous that Lana owns her own cafe at 15? Yes. But it's a mainstay iconic set of the series. And lastly, I couldn't end this without mentioning the iconic theme song that still holds up to this day. And I'll just let the show do that for me.
Hey, I like these guys. Yeah. Roomy Zero!
I mean, Grant Morrison even referenced it in his Action Comics-based Superman epic. So, that has to mean something. Anyway, thank you so much for anyone who watched this. I worked really hard on it. I know it's not that great, but much like early episodes of the Unsourced Wall radio show, I hope to only get better at this. And I do plan on making one of these for each season, so leave a comment below letting me know if that's something you'd be interested in. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.